Quincy Adams is the last one. Is this
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so here you go.
All
Yeah.
right, just checking.
Okay, so we're recording now. So Adams is not very important. John Quincy Adams is not very important. He spends most of his time dealing with Latin America and trying to establish relationships with Latin America. He's not really important for what we're doing. He's mostly important in that he sets up Andrew Jackson. Okay, so let's deal with the Native Americans of the South. If you did your reading last week, if you did the discussion last week, then you should have read about this already, right? So this should be big number T, I think. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
T? Okay. All right, so T, Cherokee and the Southern Indian problem. Go ahead and put that in quotes. All right. All right, so the southern United States is occupied by what gets called the 5 civilized tribes. The 5 civilized tribes. And the 5 civilized tribes right here are these 5. It's the Seminole. You do need to know the 5. So it's the Seminole, the Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Cherokee. Seminole, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Cherokee. Okay, so these are what the United States government calls the 5 civilized tribes. We can go ahead and acknowledge the racist nature of that term, of course, because you're implying that none of the other tribes are civilized, or, you know, this like racist idea of what it means to be a civilization, right? I would not use the term if it wasn't for the fact that like the US government uses this and it's like an official term, right? And we just have to know it. We just have to know it. Okay. So Seminole, Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw. Cherokee is the one we're going to focus the most on. But what I'm telling you about the Cherokee is kind of broadly applying to them all. Okay. So the Cherokee are going to go through a process of civilizing themselves. So what we're going to see here is that these 5 tribes are going to try to use the legal system, the white legal system, in order to gain their rights. Okay, the Cherokee are going to be the biggest ones doing this. First up, we got a man named Sequoyah. Now, did you guys profile him? Some of you guys profiled him. Speak up. Who is Sequoyah? What did he do?
So Sequoyah was this guy who made the written Cherokee language because he thought the power of the white people was in the fact that they had a written language. So,
Right. This is in one of these efforts to try to civilize the tribe. That white people would say natives can never be true equals because they don't have a written language. That all the great civilizations of the world have a written language, and so he creates the Cherokee syllabary. Okay, this is right here Cherokee. This says Cherokee. This says Phoenix. Right. So he's creating it as, it's not in alphabet technically, because each symbol represents a syllable instead of a letter, right? That's why we call it a syllabary instead of an alphabet. But you'll hear a lot of people call it an alphabet. Okay, so he invents the Cherokee syllabary, and they found the first newspaper. He's working with this man, Elias Boudinot. Elias Boudinot, who is a Cherokee. He is the son of a French person, a French man who, produced the baby and left. So Elias Boudinot was raised in the Cherokee tribe. He was, raised Cherokee, speaking Cherokee, living with the Cherokee. He's going to be the founder of this newspaper and one of the big activists trying to reform the Cherokee. Okay, so this is a big reform movement. The Cherokee are going to create a written language, and then they're also going to create a government structure. They're going to create a constitution, which includes a Bill of Rights. They're also going to create a government structure. They're also going to democratically elect their leadership. They're going to hold elections. They're going to do everything they need to do. The eventual goal here is that the Cherokee want to apply for statehood. Okay. Now, this is the Cherokee trying to say to America, hey, we can match you. We can do what you want us to do. You've told us you want us to civilize. Well, here we are. We're doing all these things. We want to become a state. The Cherokee want to become equal partners in the United States. Now, we have a couple of issues with this, right? What do you anticipate to be the first big issue? What's the first big barrier to the Cherokee becoming a state? What do you think the first big barrier is?
Maybe the land problem, like the white settlers want more land.
Yeah. Where are the Cherokee located? Georgia.
The South. Oh, okay.
Georgia. They're located mostly in Georgia, partly in Alabama, partly in Tennessee and Georgia, right? But mostly Georgia. That they want to break away from Georgia and form their own state is basically what they want to do. And there's a big fear amongst the South that if they do this, that we could see a situation where all of these tribes become their own states. And then we've got a big problem. So this is going to become a huge, huge cultural issue. A huge cultural issue. Northerners, we're going to get a situation where about a third of Northerners are going to be sympathetic to this movement, to this reform movement. About a third of Americans are really sympathetic to this. They want this to happen. They feel bad about what's happened to the Indians in the past. They want the Indians to be, noble members of society, right? They want this to happen. Okay, so we're going to get a lot of Northerners who are supporting this, and they're thinking, this is great. This is a good way for us to make up for the sins of our past, right? We shouldn't have done all those bad things to the Indians in the past. Now, when the Indians show us that they can be civilized, we should embrace them. Okay? What do you think the Southerners are going to say about that? Yeah. The Southerners basically say that is a bunch of BS. We don't want anything to do with it, right? And the Southerners are very quick to point out Northern hypocrisy, right? Because the Southerners will say, listen here, Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, you killed all your Indians and you got rid of all your Indians. And now you're trying to tell us what to do with the Indians? You're trying to tell us that we have to carve up our states when you just killed all of yours? Right? The Southerners are like, you are a bunch of hypocrites and we don't believe you. We don't listen to you. I don't agree with the South very often, but that argument makes sense, right? The North is being hypocritical, right? The Northerners would say, we didn't know any better 50 years ago, but now we know better today. The Southerners call BS on that. And they're like, no, we reject that argument. Okay. All of this kind of cultural war is going to produce the next election, right? This is going on into the next election where at this time, a bunch of people are advocating for the abolishing of slavery and for getting rid of slavery and for like giving rights and things to the Native Americans, right? There's a bunch of Northerners who are saying this, and just like the pendulum swings in American history, right? Whenever we elect a really conservative person, it swings and we elect someone liberal. We elect somebody really liberal, it swings back and we elect a conservative, right? We've seen this happening back and forth. Market revolution brings about changes in family. Second Great Awakening reinforces tradition, right? Enlightenment brings about a rejection of tradition. Great Awakening comes back again. So just like swinging to the left here, swinging to the left for abolishing slavery and allowing for the Indians is going to swing to the right, elect Andrew Jackson. Big number U, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson. All right, so he's our 7th president. He's a Democrat. This is the founding of the Democratic Party. This is the same Democratic Party we have today. But you'll find that through most of American history, the Democrats were a pretty conservative party. They're pretty conservative. They're oftentimes the party of racism and slavery and stuff, oftentimes. Okay. The symbol of the Democrats today is the donkey, right? It's going to come from here. It's going to come from here because people criticizing Jackson call him a jackass. And so he like leans into it. He like puts pictures of donkeys up and he says, yeah, I'm a jackass. Right. And so that's where the Democrats get their symbol for a donkey. The Republican symbol of a Republican doesn't mean anything. They just picked a large, smart, noble animal as their symbol. The elephant doesn't mean anything. But the donkey means jackass, as in Andrew Jackson. All right. By far and away, the most important thing you need to get about Andrew Jackson is populism. He is a populist. This means he appeals to the common man. He appeals to the common man. He appeals to populism. This means that you say what regular people want you to say. Now, there's been a big change in America, and Jackson's our first person to bring this change in. The change is that for the very first time, all white men can vote. They eliminated the property requirement. So it used to be that you had to own property in order to vote. You had to be a white man who owned property. Now they've eliminated the property. All white men can vote. And Andrew Jackson becomes our very first president to run in that circumstance, where he's running, talking to all the white men of the country, all of those poor whites everywhere, right? And he goes to them and he says, I speak for you. I'm the voice of the common man. I speak for you. Okay. This should sound pretty familiar. This should sound pretty familiar because Donald Trump is in this model, right? Donald Trump has followed the Andrew Jackson model. He's very, very populist. He spoke for the common man. That's how he was elected in 2016, right? Andrew Jackson also runs on a platform of racism. He explicitly says, I will protect slavery and I will eliminate the Indians. He runs on a pro-slavery, anti-Indian platform. Now, Jackson is very, very important. He is one of the most important American presidents ever. He's probably top 5 most important presidents. Very, very important. In fact, this entire time period is called the Jacksonian era. It's named after him, okay? He reinvents politics. Every politician after Jackson has to appeal to the common man. Everyone. They all have to do this. He's also the first president to travel around the country. He's traveling around the country and like appealing to common men. And he's going to different towns and telling the common people what they want to hear, right? Every president does this now. Every politician does this now. Jackson's the first person, and Jackson, everyone has to follow Jackson, okay? This is very, very important. This is highly likely to appear on both my test on Wednesday and AP test. Okay, it's the most important thing you need to know about Jackson. He's also kind of a nut. This is like not likely to appear on the test, but he's kind of a nut. He duels often. Like he gets in, I think, 3 different duels, and he keeps winning the duels, which is why he's still around. He actually gets shot in the shoulder. He has a bullet in his shoulder, which is why most of his pictures, like on the $20 bill, you see him, he's always like this, right? He has one of his shoulders that never goes up straight again, right? Because he's got a bullet lodged in his shoulder. Yeah. All right. He's also going to dismantle the second bank of the US. He dismantles the bank again because he doesn't trust bankers. He doesn't trust rich people. He doesn't trust this. Okay. So he's going to dismantle the bank, which is going to cause trouble. And then most of the time in history, he gets an A for importance, but he gets an F. I I don't have a problem at all giving him a straight up F for what he did, because he's responsible for the Trail of Tears and he's responsible for genocide. He's responsible for genocide and he's responsible for a bunch of other problems that I have very little sympathy about him. All right, so let's go into the next big thing that we need about Jackson, the spoils system, V. Big number V, the spoils system. All right, so this comes from the phrase, to the victor goes the spoils. To the victor goes the spoils, right? It's a fancy way of saying winner takes all. All right, so Jackson creates a government system where the elected official appoints people he personally knows, his personal friends, and people who gave him campaign donations to government positions. You're basically giving away government jobs to his personal friends and to people who gave money to his campaign. You're just giving them jobs. This is what we call the spoil system. This system is not going to go away. This system is going to stay in place for the next 80 years. Okay? Prior to this, if you need to, like, let's say, appoint somebody to head up the post office, right? You would appoint somebody who like knew how to run the post office. You'd say something like, hey, Bob here, he ran the Maryland post office and he did a really good job of it. I'm going to promote him up to the national government, right? Andrew Jackson, on the other hand, just appoints like his friend who's never stepped foot in a post office. Andrew Jackson just says, I like him, have this job. And he just starts filling jobs up and down the government, all throughout the government, with just his personal friends and people who paid the campaign. This spoil system is going to be what we today would define as corruption, right? This is basically making an institutionalized version of massive government corruption. This is the beginning of massive government corruption. And we're going to keep getting worse and worse and worse over the next decades. We're going to finally get to a point where it's so deeply corrupt that the government is just that these people are just taking money from the government. Okay. Okay, let's move on. W, nullification. All right, so the nullification crisis. W, the nullification crisis, 1832 to 33. This comes from some of the banking issues. Andrew Jackson raises tariffs. He raises tariffs on European goods. So the Europeans raise tariffs on American goods, particularly cotton. Raising tariffs on American goods causes, when the Europeans raise tariffs on American goods, that cotton, right? South Carolina is going to lose a bunch of money. And so South Carolina, headed up by John C. Calhoun, who looks like he belongs in a haunted house, surely, right? If anyone belongs in a haunted house, this guy looks. I mean, he looks mostly dead, doesn't he? So he is the senator from South Carolina, and he's going to lead this. South Carolina basically decides to leave the Union because of the tariffs. South Carolina says, we don't have to listen to you. We don't really like you much anyway. We're out of here. Andrew Jackson invades South Carolina. He invades South Carolina and forces South Carolina to stay part of the Union. Now, this wouldn't be that big of a deal, except we know what's going to be happening in 25 years, right? What's happening 25 years from now?
Civil War.
The Civil War, right? We know the Civil War is coming in 25 years. We know that it's going to be based on the same problem, and we also know it's going to start in South Carolina. Well, maybe you guys don't know that, but I'm telling you now, right? We in 2020 know that this is coming. So we can see this as a problem. Okay. Andrew Jackson also takes the opportunity to insult Calhoun, insult Henry Clay. Like Andrew Jackson has kind of Trumpian, right? Kind of Trumpian, where he is like insulting people all the time. Andrew Jackson like threatens to shoot these guys and like bury them out in the yard. Like he's, yeah, Jackson's he is kind of a nut. All right, let's get to the Indian Removal Act. Nika, are you doing okay? You're looking like you're tired. You're looking like you're going to sleep.
I'm so tired. It's fine though. I'm okay. I have my notes.
Okay, well, we're almost done. We're almost done. Okay, so the Indian Removal Act gets passed in 1830. This is the federal government. The federal government is going to move the 5 tribes, the 5 civilized tribes, and they're all going to move to Oklahoma. Okay. Now, the Cherokee sue to stop this. The Cherokee sue to stop this. They go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically says we can't stop this, right? And John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he says Cherokee, Native Americans are not citizens in the United States, and so or Indians are not citizens in the United States, so Indians can't bring their case up. If only the Indians had a white person, then the Indians could speak on behalf of that white person and I could make a ruling in your favor. John Marshall is very sympathetic to the Indians. And he basically rules against them and he says, in the case of Cherokee versus Georgia, in that case, Marshall rules in favor of Georgia. And Marshall says that the Cherokee had signed a contract, signed a treaty with the US government, but they never signed one with Georgia. So Georgia can do whatever it wants. Right? And John Marshall says, if only you had a white guy, then I could represent you and I could give you the ruling you needed. So what do the Cherokees do? They get a white guy. So they're going to bring up another suit. Now, Georgia had passed a law. In that law, they said that nobody can live on Indian land except for Indians. Nobody can live on Indian land except for Indians. And the Cherokee have welcomed a bunch of these sympathetic white people who are like sympathetic people coming in and has welcomed them into their land. One of the men is named Samuel Worcester. So Samuel Worcester is a Christian missionary. He's a Christian missionary, and he's there with a couple of other missionaries, and they're living in the Cherokee land, converting them into Christianity. Georgia comes in and they arrest Worcester. This is on purpose. Worcester and the other 2 missionaries on purpose put themselves there in order to get arrested. Because then they can challenge it up to the Supreme Court. Okay? They get thrown in jail. And this goes up to the Supreme Court, right? Where they're going to go all the way up. And the court case is called Worcester v. Georgia. Worcester versus Georgia. In this case, John Marshall says he rules in favor of Worcester, and he says Native American, the Cherokee have the right to exist. They have the right to rule their own land. They have the right to rule their land without interference from any other part of the government. Okay? And he says the Cherokee should be allowed to become a state. John Marshall is basically ruling in favor of the Cherokee. Now, what do you think Georgia's going to do about that? If you did your discussion last week, you should know. What is Georgia going to do?
don't they try and make a different treaty?
No, they're not going to do that. Georgia ignores the Supreme Court and they do nothing. They just ignore the Supreme Court. They do nothing. Andrew Jackson backs up Georgia. Andrew Jackson says, and this is an exact quote, Andrew Jackson says, if John Marshall wants to make this ruling, then let John Marshall come down here and enforce it. Jackson just decides to ignore the Supreme Court. Now, all of this, part of this is because Jackson is really super racist against natives. Part of it is that. The other bigger part is they just discovered gold in the Cherokee land. When they discover gold in the Cherokee land, it's all over. Because Georgia's like, oh, heck yes, we're going in. This is the beginning of what we call the Trail of Tears. Okay? And Jackson just ignores the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled in favor, clearly ruled in favor of it. Worcester never gets out of jail. He just stays in jail. Worcester and the other Christian missionaries, they just stay in jail. Georgia doesn't release them, even though the Supreme Court tells them to release them. This is what we're going to call the Trail of Tears. So, the Trail of Tears is the forced migration of the 5 civilized tribes from the South to Oklahoma. We in the modern world would call this a genocide. We in the modern world would call this a genocide. Okay. In fact, this is one of the things that they use when they're trying to create the definition for a genocide. Now, the 4 tribes are going to get forced out: Chickasaw, Choctaw, Cherokee, and Creek. Those tribes are going to get forced out. The Seminole are going to resist. We're going to stick with the Seminole in just a sec. We're going to come back to the Seminole, but let's deal with these 4 right here. Okay. So the Chickasaw, they basically agree and go quickly. And so the Chickasaw, basically, they don't lose very many people. But the Cherokee, Creek, and Choctaw, they all strongly resist, and they get forced into these long marches for 1,000 miles across the country in the middle of the winter time. And if you look on our map here, a lot of these routes take them up here into like Illinois and Missouri, right? In the middle of the winter time when it's like 0 degrees. Okay. They're going to end up killing about 3,000 natives on the trail. They're going to end up killing about 3,000 natives on the trail. There's a couple of very famous instances. One particularly famous instance is when the army, the Indians are freezing to death in the middle of the winter. And so the army gives them blankets to keep themselves warm. And the army on purpose gathered blankets from a smallpox hospital. And the blankets had smallpox infected in the blankets and killed a bunch of the natives with a smallpox infection. This is one of the most famous instances here. There's another really famous instance where they're up in Illinois, and the natives are being forced across a big river, right? In the river, it's ice cold in the middle of the winter, and the natives can't swim across the river. The ferry doesn't want to transport natives. They don't want natives on their boats. And so they normally charge 10 cents a ride for white people. They charge $1 a ride for the natives. Well, the natives don't have any money. They don't have any money. And so the few who do have money go across, But what we end up happening is hundreds and hundreds of them end up just freezing to death on the shore of the river while the ferry is just sitting there waiting for them to give their money. That they just sit there on the side shore of the river and die of hypothermia. The South is going to take this land and they're going to turn it all into plantations. It's all going to become plantations. All of the land. Georgia starts us off by just partitioning out land and selling it, auctioning it off to white people as the white people move in. But then Alabama and Mississippi are going to do the same thing. They auction all the land off, give it to the white people. Let's deal with the Seminole. The Seminole are going to go into what we call the Seminole Wars. Some of the Seminoles do get collected and sent over. Some of them do. But a lot of the Seminoles survive in Florida because they basically retreat into the swamps and like live in the middle of the swamps, and the white people just leave them there because the white people don't want to use the swamp anyway, because the swamps, you can't really grow anything. You can't, it's not a plantation, it's not land suitable for anything. And so the Seminole actually end up living in these swamps of Florida for quite a long time, for the next 100 years or so. Yeah. So the Seminole, part of the Seminole gets sent over, but most of the Seminole, probably 2/3 of the Seminole, well, let's see, about 1/4 of the Seminole get sent out, 1/4 get killed, and then about half of the Seminole end up living in the side of the swamps of Florida. But the Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Cherokee are basically all either killed or forced out. Okay. Do you guys have questions about the Trail of Tears? Oh, the Trail of Tears happens, it starts under Jackson, but it finishes under Van Buren. He's our next president, Van Buren. Van Buren is not very important. We're not going to spend a lot of time with Van Buren. He's not very important. He's mostly just important for the Trail of Tears, basically. He's interesting. I find Van Buren kind of interesting because he's an English language learner. He's the only president we've ever had that does not speak English natively. He speaks German. He grew up speaking German in a little cabin in Pennsylvania somewhere, or New York, I think it's New York. A little cabin somewhere, New York, where his parents were German immigrants. So he actually learned English as an adult. And so he spoke his entire life with a really thick German accent. The only president we've ever had that was an English language learner. But other than that, he's not really important. He's only important for the Trail of Tears. Okay. All right. Here's the last thing we're going to do. This is X, I think. No, W.
I think it's Y.
Sure. Okay. Y. Let's go with Y. Y stands for the Texas Revolution. All right. So, Mexico has gained its independence. At this time, Mexico controls Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. I'll say it again so you can get them all. At this time, Mexico has gained its independence from Spain, and it controls Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. It's mostly empty though, right? It's mostly empty up here. About 90% of Mexicans live down in what is today Mexico, and only about 10% of Mexicans live north of the Rio Grande. They only live in those American state areas, right? Like Utah has like 100 Mexicans in it, something like that, right? Like most of these territories are claimed, but not really claimed, right? Because the Mexicans know that it's empty, they allow Americans to move into Texas. Basically, Americans just start moving in and they don't even ask. And then the Mexicans finally say, okay, this is good. We're not going to build a wall. We're going to let you guys come in here and do the jobs that Mexicans don't want to do, right? And so they allow these American immigrants to cross the border and kind of make farms and work the land and stuff. Okay? The Americans bring slaves, and Mexico doesn't want slavery, but they allow it, but they want it to end. The Americans never feel allegiance to the Mexicans, and so the Americans are always loyal to the United States. This is eventually going to boil up into a tension where in 1835, we're going to get a war that breaks out, and it's the War for Texan Independence, the Texan Revolution. Okay? The most famous, most important part of this, of course, is the Alamo, the Battle of the Alamo. Have any of you guys ever been to San Antonio? Have you guys seen the Alamo? Nika, you have? Right? So the Alamo basically looks like this in the picture, right? It looks like this, but today it's surrounded by skyscrapers, right? It's in the middle of the city of San Antonio. San Antonio built up all the way around it. At the time, it's this church. This is called a mission. It's this church and a fort around the church. So the Alamo is where 100 Texans basically fight the Mexicans. 100 Texans, including Davy Crockett, the American hero Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier. He's a senator from Tennessee at this time. And these men in the Alamo, they defend the Alamo, gloriously defend the Alamo. 100 men fighting against 3,000 Mexican soldiers. And all of those American men get killed. They all die. But a boy escaped. They wrote a letter. They wrote a letter and they gave it to the boy. And the boy takes the letter and he escapes down through a drainage pipe, like a drain pipe area, like through an irrigation thing. And he gets out. The letter makes it back to Sam Houston, the leader of the Texans. And the letter gets published in newspapers across the country. And it all says, remember the Alamo. Remember the noble sacrifice of these Americans. And Texans all over, they all get their weapons and they all gather their strength. And they're all inspired by the heroic sacrifice of these Americans against the evil Mexicans. And the Texans fight back and they win. They win their independence. Okay? Texans then promptly turn to the United States and apply for statehood. At which point the United States says, no. We say no. Texas is going to become its own country for about 10 years. It's going to become the Republic of Texas for about 10 years because the United States won't let it into the country. This is where we're going to get the Lone Star Republic. That's why it's the Lone Star State, right? Because every state gets a star on the flag, but because Texas is by itself, it's the Lone Star. Okay. Do you guys know why Texas isn't allowed in? You guys know why? Slavery. They don't want to add another slave state to the Senate. It'll unbalance the Senate. This is giving us a look at what's to come, right? Everything in the United States to come for the next 30 years is going to be about slavery. Basically, everything that happens is about slavery coming up here. Okay? No, but that will go on our next unit. Okay? Your test is on. Do you guys have questions about Texas before we get moving? Going once, going twice? Okay. All right, so your test is going to be on Wednesday. It'll be on Wednesday. I'll email you guys the code. Logan, I'll include you as well because I'm going to assume that you're going to be home this whole week probably. But if you're not feeling well, we can always do it later with you. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So we'll do the test on Wednesday. Okay. I don't have a study guide to this chapter. We forgot to do it. I forgot to make one. The students brought it up. So sorry. You're going to have to just do it on your own. Okay. But this test is going to include like the market revolution. It's going to include everything having to do with market revolution, everything having to do with those reform thinkers that you guys did the assignment on last week, all the way up to Jackson, everything having to do with Jackson. So this test is basically everything from Jefferson to Jackson. Okay? Are we clear? Are we good to go? Do any of y'all have questions? Oh, the last thing is the practice test is on Canvas. You guys can take that practice test as many times as you want. If you have questions about what's on the test, go to the practice test. That'll tell you what's on the test. It's literally the test. Okay? I will randomly pull 50 questions off of there. I'll just tell the computer to randomly select 50. Cool? Cool. All right. Anika, you need to take a nap.
Yeah, I'm gonna go do that.
All right. Have a good day, everybody. I'll see you later. I'm stopping the recording now.